From Wall Street to Main Street to help small business owners have the same capital as corporate America and give them the same resources as a larger company. We cover business funding, business credit, scaling, business consulting, and much more. Check out the website at shieldadvisorygroup.com. Welcome to the show, The Liquid Lunch Project.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Liquid Lunch Project. I am Matthieu Mehuys alongside my partner, the professor, Luigi Rosabianca. What's on tap today, Lou?
My dear partner, we've known each other long enough, and I think it's time we had that conversation. It's time we talk about the birds and the bees. Matt, it's very important that we live in a very green, friendly, biodiverse world. I mean, it's the only world we have. And today, to help me talk to you about the birds and the bees, we have, for further confusion, Matthieu Mehuys. Matthieu, meet Matt, Matt, meet Matthieu, the Belgique Magnifique. Matthieu, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Lou. What a great introduction. I'm so excited to be on your show. I love your content. I love what you guys are doing. And
You do not love what I am doing because I am a green assassin. Every time you come to my yard, I am assassinating some sort of biodiversity. So please help us, help me, and make my wife happy. Walk us through the importance of biodiversity and an ecological garden and how we can incorporate that not only in our homes, but also our place of business.
Yeah, definitely. That's a really good question. And I think to start to answer this question, actually, I first want to talk about my backstory from where all of this started, because we talked a little bit about it offline, but I actually grew up on a family farm. So my father and my brother are farmers, and I have great respect for them. But when I grew up on the farm, I got extremely fascinated about how nature works. Like on the farm, I would go out with my dad. Probably I was around the age of 3 to 5 years old. We would go out to the fields and we would go and see what he had put on the fields. And we could see the seeds starting to germinate. And from that early age, I was so amazed about like how it's even possible that if you put a seed in contact with the earth, it can grow into a plant, it can grow into something you can eat, or it can even grow into a huge tree. I was like, it was mind-blowing for me to start to understand that. So from that early experience, I also said to my parents, I want to have my own vegetable garden, because at that time on the farm, it was focused on cattle and cash crops. So we didn't really have like a vegetable production. So I said, I want to start doing that. At that time, I was probably like 5 years old. And then my parents said, no, we don't have time for this. We don't have space in the garden. Like it kind of like was pushed away, but I persisted and I really started to grow my own food. Now, I started out with radishes, and Lou, this is a great advice that I can give to you. If you want to start out to grow your own food, start out with radishes. It's the easiest thing ever. You put a couple of seeds on the ground, a couple of weeks later, you come back.
I imagine radishes are pretty robust. They could even defeat my assassination attempts.
Yes, well, we have to still look at that, but it's the easiest to grow, let me say. So me as a child, I had that early success, and then I thought like, okay, this is so simple. I got a bunch of seeds and I started to just spray all of the seeds everywhere in the garden, thinking like, this is it, so easy, right? But then I kind of left the garden and I came back a couple of weeks later thinking like, okay, it will be full of vegetables, full of really rich produce, but you can already guess what happened next. Like I came back, it was overgrown by weeds. Devastating, right? 5-year-old, like shit, what is it? And from that very moment, I really wanted to understand why this happened. How does nature work? Why do weeds come? What is ecology? Like from that early age, I studied that, and then I studied landscape architecture, got to learn more about it, and now in my day-to-day job, I'm actually teaching people also how they can use that knowledge and how to create their own garden. So that is just to give you the backstory of where all of this started. And to answer your question about why is ecology and biodiversity so important for us humans, I'll tell you what, the health of our planet is directly linked to the health of us humans. if we look at the modern health of humanity, we are stuck with a lot of diseases that didn't exist about 100 years ago. Cancer, diabetes, other things that weren't around. They're all related to how our food is produced and how we are treating our own gardens, our own environment. There's way too much chemicals being used, and that is why our personal health is not as it should be. Humans are not thriving. So that's just one reason, and there's a couple of other reasons that we can touch upon why it's so important that people start growing their own food in their own garden and also create a healthy environment in their own garden, because it's the area where you spend the most time in. It's where your kids are playing around. Like, this is really important to do it in a good way. And even if you do it in a certain way that is very efficient, it will save you a lot of time and even save you some money, because you'll have your own vegetables, right?
Matthieu, let's talk about that efficiency, because a lot of people that are listening right now, they live in the urban jungles. We live in city centers, we live in apartment buildings, we live in condominiums. So we don't have 2, 3, 4 acres to sprinkle your seeds everywhere, right? We don't have the process of germinating. Tell our audience a couple of tips in how they can have their basil and parsley and maybe a tomato, even in their humble apartment or on their windowsill. This way they can eat healthy without having the 5 acres.
Yeah, that's another great question. So the most important thing that people have to understand, or your audience has to understand, is that it all relates to the health of the soil. And again, this is actually also linked to our human health. If we can create soils that are healthy, full of microorganisms, and not full of chemicals, then you'll actually start to grow healthy plants that are easier to grow, that needs less maintenance. So this is really important. Even if you have like a small backyard garden, you can start growing your own food on basically 1 square meters, which is a couple square feet. And then one of the most effective ways of improving the health of your soil, because oftentimes, even if you buy a new house or you have a new property, there probably will be already a lot of chemicals in the soil. So the way to do it is to use compost. Like, if you can get your hands on high quality compost, and to get high quality compost, you actually have to research a little bit about how to do it, or get in contact with farmers that are doing it regeneratively or organically, because they have all the resources. And if you can get a bit of their compost, you don't even need huge amounts, because if you get that really high quality compost, it's full of microorganisms, and then the soil will actually start to restore itself. So I think compost is probably the key to creating a healthy environment.
Now, Matthieu, I heard a rumor that one of the ways to create really rich soil is by utilizing the ash and remnants of your fireplace. Now, not many of us have fireplaces. So for those of us that don't have fireplaces, how can we make such a carbon-rich soil possible?
Well, that's a great topic that you touched upon. And it's true that ashes are great for the soil, but there's something that's even better, and it's related to it, and it's called biochar. Now, biochar is actually similar to the char we are using for barbecuing. It's kind of heated, but not fully burnt. And if you look at biochar on a microscopical level, it has thousands or millions of facets. So it has a lot of surfaces, which means that the nutrients that we want to keep in our soil can actually attach to it way better. So that's actually the reason why ash, or better biochar, because it's even better, that you can use that in your garden and mix it into the soil. And something that I also came across lately is that from the production of biochar, there's another product which is called wood vinegar. And I could explain in depth how it's produced, but it's basically liquid smoke. Now, if you can get your hands on that product, it is crazy what it does to the growth of the plants.
Now, wood vinegar is an actual liquid?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, great.
It's basically liquefied smoke. And the reason why it's so good for the plants is that also back in the days when, let's say, humans were not that active on our environment, there were also wildfires. We think like all wildfires are due to climate change. It's not true. It was already around. It's actually a way that nature restores itself. It's kind of cleaning up things, and then the whole smoke gets into the atmosphere. And what they could see is that when that smoke rains down on a certain area, then plants regrow way faster. It's as if like it's a wake-up call for nature. Like, okay, we've burned a lot of resources. Now, when it comes onto you, you can grow faster.
Matthew, you realize you just made a lot of liberal enemies during this podcast.
In what sense?
I mean, everyone thinks that forest fires are man-made, but now you're telling us that Mother Nature has a way of purging herself.
Yeah, I think I would make more friends, liberal friends, rather than enemies, maybe by saying
I would hope so. I would hope so. Hey, Matthew, I also heard another crazy theory. Is it true that certain soils are compatible with certain produce? So you need to kind of make that marriage successfully?
Yeah, that's actually to a certain degree, a common misunderstanding, because what happened to agriculture and food production in the 60s and the 50s is something which is called the Green Revolution. Now, the Green Revolution, it sounds kind of positive, but it wasn't actually, because farming became something that got detached from nature. They started to use a lot of synthetic nitrogen, a lot of chemicals were introduced. We've got Roundup, the most
potash.
All these chemicals were introduced. So farming started to be looked at as a chemical process. So what in a chemical process, pH levels, whether something is acidic or alkaline, was also having an influence on how plants grow. Because they were killing the soil so much, all the microorganisms disappeared. So it became more like a chemical process of if you have an acidic soil, you can only grow these types of crops. And it became like, very chemistry based. Now, the beautiful thing is that if you focus rather on creating, again, a healthy soil and kind of stepping away from a massive use of chemicals, then the acidity of the soil is less impactful. Like they saw that in what the assumption was, for example, with pumpkins, that you can only grow pumpkins in rather like alkaline soil, not too acidic. Now, that was back in the days, or still commonly today, when they're like putting a lot of inputs, a lot of chemicals. Now, what they've seen in farmers that are doing it regeneratively and doing it ecologically, that their produce is even higher. They can make higher yields with less input. And even in soils that are more acidic, the pumpkins were still growing well. So it's kind of like a double answer, right? It does impact, but it only impacts if you're kind of doing it in the chemical way. When you do it in a way that is more in harmony with nature, it doesn't actually matter that much.
Now, Matthew, is there any truth to that theory where you should leave the land dormant maybe for a year every once in a while to give it a chance to regenerate?
That was a common practice pre-industrial revolution, where they would leave the land because generally there was so much land, so they could leave it just to lay dormant, and then the soil would kind of restore itself. And I think that could be a good practice, but these days we actually should not necessarily do that, because we do have to produce a lot of food for a growing global population. There's actual other ways that also do that in a shorter time, and is a practice that is called using cover crops. Now, cover crops in agriculture is something, and you can also do it in your garden. It's an amazing thing that between two crops, annual crops, there's actually often a very long period of nothing. So most farmers, we actually tested that on our farm with great success, is that on our farm we had an early harvest of potatoes. So potatoes were harvested early in August, so in Europe's summer already. And only the year after, in May, June, there would be pumpkins planted. So that's a very long period where nothing really happens on the soil, on the surface. So common practice was, okay, let's leave the soil like that. Weeds start to grow, and then when you want to plant your pumpkins, you just round up, put some herbicide, kill all the weeds, and then you put in the pumpkins. That was how it was done, how the farmers were taught to do it. So we questioned that, like, okay, why can we not put a crop in between that is not necessarily productive, but a crop that can restore the health of the soil and also reduce the weed pressure on the soil. So we incorporated this diverse cover crop, and I can talk in great detail about it, but time is limited. So, but we incorporated that, which enabled the soil to actually stay alive for that whole in-between period. Now, then we planted the pumpkins, and because also there were more roots in the soil, the pumpkins were growing much better. We also had to put less input because the pumpkins could use the nutrients from the previous plants. So it's like it's quite mind-blowing what nature is actually capable of doing if you use it and leverage it.
Matthieu, what's the role of weeds in a biodiverse farm?
Well, we don't necessarily want weeds, because people that were saying like, oh, we should have weeds and weeds are okay. Well, it's not necessarily what we want, because what weeds are is actually a way that nature wants to restore itself. So if you like turn the soil each and every time, and this is something that I can also highly recommend to your audience, if you're gardening, try to avoid like to completely turn around the soil, because if you do that, you're basically awakening all the weeds to start growing again, because that's the way how nature works and how it restores itself. So to mitigate weeds, the best way to do it is actually to incorporate the cover crops that I just talked about, because in cover crops we are actually choosing the weeds. Well, let's not call it weeds, it's actually annual plants. We as a farmer or as a manager, you're deciding which plants will grow for a certain time. And these plants that we choose, the seeds that we choose, are not so aggressive, and they actually die off on their own. So rather than not doing anything and letting aggressive weeds take over, you specifically have a management system to improve the health of the soil and to have a cover of the soil as well, because that's very important. Because again, if you look into nature, there's nowhere that you can see a bare soil. It hardly ever happens, only when there's like a landslide. So we have to think in the way like, how is nature intended to work? So that's why these cover crops are so useful as well.
So Matthieu, have you heard of the company Ohalo?
Ohalo, no.
Okay, so Ohalo, what they're doing is they're producing, they call it boosted breeding with plants. So I guess I'm not too familiar with the subject, but I overheard this recently. So I guess with the plants, the new plant gets half the genes from the mother and half the genes from the father plant, right? They're able to actually pass all the genes on from those plants. And right now they're producing, in your potato example, they just came out with a study, literally, I think it was 2 weeks ago, where they said that they're yielding 600% more than what they used to right now. Yeah. So it's founded by somebody over here named David Freeberg. He's a serial founder, but he's been working on this for the last 4 years. So what they're able to actually do is take the genes from the parents, and instead of them being watered down, take the best genes and then move them over, which is producing more yield from that as well.
Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting, but I'm also a bit worried about like, is that getting into the realm of like,
it's a bit Frankensteinish.
Yeah, oh yeah,
GMO,
absolutely.
Because
but I actually don't have that already with a lot of stuff.
Yeah, and definitely in America, it's full of GMO.
Yeah,
which is
the bananas today look nothing like the bananas from 100 years ago.
No, actually, there's only one banana breed that is commonly used, and it's actually under a lot of pressure. Like prices of bananas might skyrocket or are actually increasing because the plant is not performing well enough, because there's a limit to how much.
How do farmers do that? Dole just came out with a $400 pink pineapple. It's small, it's $400, and the meat is pink. Now, you have to special order this thing because people are crazy. But how do they change the essence of the fruit? How does that occur?
Like, I don't have an actual answer to that. I think there's some crazy stuff that can be happened when you start messing around with the genes. But actually also, Matthew, to answer or to touch upon your subject, I don't think that either you or Lou would want to have your children or yourself to be like 100% of the genes of both your parents or any of that things. Like, we're actually looking at the whole like problem in a wrong perspective, in my opinion, because we're trying to, again, like, make scientific improvements to have crops that perform better, that can even handle more chemical input, and then no, it's all not needed. Nature has everything that it needs to have. We just have to focus on the right things, and the right thing is to focus on healthy soil. Because the other thing is that, okay, we could have like 400 times higher yields with these crazy potatoes, but I doubt it that the nutritional value of these potatoes are going to be even remotely close to what you can produce if you do it in a way that is from a healthy soil, a rich, biodiverse, full of microorganisms soil. Because most of the food that is produced on a global scale is focused on weight. We're producing food to have a higher yield. And that's just how the market works in a way, but I think it will change if we can change it from weight to nutritional value. Because as it turns out, there's oranges that you and I buy in the supermarket that don't have any vitamin C, that are mostly sugar. Like, why on earth would you want to buy oranges that don't have vitamin C? It's the whole point of buying them, right? So,
But Matthew, how do we do that? You're touching on something really interesting. Like, the American history is fascinating because during World War II, we didn't have enough food for the soldiers overseas.
Yeah.
So there was a huge PR campaign to create these Liberty Gardens.
yes, exactly.
But the Liberty Gardens didn't die after World War II. So for another generation, all these homes had Liberty Gardens. But then, like you mentioned, the Green Revolution, right? So Archer Daniels and the mass producing of corn and soy and wheat and, high caloric, low nutritional foods. How do we go back to our Liberty Gardens? And maybe we can call them the Matthieu Gardens.
I love that. Liberty Gardens, the whole aspect, it's an amazing story, right? Like, people, please start growing your own food because we need the food for the soldiers. That's amazing. But I think it really boils down to each and every individual. Like, people have to start asking themselves, like, what do you want to leave behind for your children? What food do you want to put on the table? What environment do you want to build? What legacy do you want to leave behind? And then if you start thinking about that, it kind of becomes inevitable to either start growing your own food or get in touch with regenerative farmers in your area, go and visit them, talk to them. Like, this is all part of the community, and that's why this is so important, I think. Yeah.
Hey, Matthew, just to share a personal story. My son was born approximately 400 days ago. Okay. And my wife made a decision that I am going to make every meal. I don't want him to eat anything that is processed or concentrated, or I'm going to make every meal.
Wow.
So 400 times 3. So she has made approximately 12 to 1,300 homemade meals, puree, and et cetera, et cetera. I got to tell you, maybe the first day was difficult. After that, it's a labor of love. So I think you're right. Just like PR in America convinced us to do Liberty Gardens, I don't think it's a heavy lift once you realize how important it is just from a nutritional value.
Yeah, exactly. And it's also mostly, I guess, with any new habit, it's the starting of it, which is the hardest. And to becoming consistent. Once you're consistent, it becomes part of your habit or part of your life. So I also want to help people to actually overcome that, because most people are kind of stuck in like, okay, I want to do it, but then how do I actually do it? Like, okay, let's go on YouTube and watch a bunch of videos about how to start a garden. you just get overwhelmed. Like there's so much stuff and there's so many people saying all kinds of different things that actually the whole idea of my masterclass, where people can learn how they can do it on their own, was that I had a client here in Belgium. We completely redesigned their garden, and we did like it was kind of a bigger property, so we did half of it, mostly around the house, and we completed it. And the client was like, "Oh, I really love the work that you've done. The garden is amazing, but now I have this other part in my garden, and I don't want any more landscape architects. I actually want to do it myself. I want to experience how it is to design, to create, to grow my own food." And I kind of made a click in my head, because I had already an idea of like, how can we get people actively to become gardeners? So then this idea was born. I created a masterclass where people can learn it in 9 weeks, how they can do it themselves, with like a lot of guidance and a lot of support, so they know like they're on the right track. Because you can do it on your own, and I can even recommend a couple of books, but it's very like time consuming, and it's not like a straight line to become a successful gardener. You will always have to overcome certain things. So yeah, I think that really helps for people that are really like, okay, I want to do this.
Matthieu, I feel like we haven't done you any justice. We've gotten so much information from you, and we've learned so much, but you're a landscape architect, for God's sakes. Tell us some fun rock star stories of some fancy projects that you're working on.
Well,
and don't be shy.
Actually, no, I want to like, maybe I can tell a little story that might be interesting for your audience, but that is kind of like a catchy story. I actually, I was working in Saudi Arabia for a while, and because I wanted to experience something new, I was working as a freelancer for a German company in Saudi Arabia, and they wanted me to get on board on some of the projects.
If you could do a garden in Saudi Arabia with the sand and heat, you must be good.
Mm.
Well, it's mostly about the climate and the environment. Like you have to create a new environment there. And they actually get decent amount of rain. It's just about using the rain well enough. But during COVID, they actually, like COVID, everything was locked, no airfare, nothing was happening. They actually asked me to do a garden for the King Salman, and they would actually want me to fly in like on a private jet to actually start designing and working on his project. But I said like, no, I'm not going to do this. This is too sketchy. But that's just a little story I wanted to share. Like
you have to be amused that they were going to put you on a private jet to do a biodiverse garden.
Yeah, that's kind of contradictory as well. Well,
hey Matthieu, why don't you tell everybody where they can find the masterclass and where they can reach out to you on the socials?
Yeah, so my website, where you can find all my information on the masterclass, is called www.gardenofyourdreams.com. So there they can find some free content. And actually, I also want to make a Calendly link available for your audience. So if people like feel the urge to start immediately, they can book a free training, a free call with me. It's 30 minutes. We'll look at your property and see what is actually needed to improve your garden. So then if people also like feel like, okay, I want this beautiful garden, but I'm very occupied with my business, I don't actually have much time, then we also offer a service to kind of a done for me approach, where we design everything. We make sure the right contractors come and actually do the whole thing. Then people can go and look on my other website, which is www.paulonia-la.com. And there you can also see some of the reference projects that we have done so far. And then you can also find me on all of the social media platforms, on Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn. So people are happy to reach out to me there as well and connect. Yeah, that's it.
Matthieu, thank you so much. We want to be respectful of your time, but before we let you go, I got one question for you. If you could only grow one vegetable, what would it be?
Only one. I would have to eat that for the rest of my days as well.
Yeah.
That's a hard one. Let me just think. I think tomatoes, yeah. And I think Lou would agree, right?
Sounds good. Good choice. I thought you were going to say radishes. I was getting nervous.
Like radishes each and every day, that's too much.
Matthew, thank you so much for your time. Everybody, that's a wrap of the Liquid Lunch Project. We'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you for listening to the show. And make sure you subscribe, leave a review, and share it with a friend. We'll see you on the next episode of the Liquid Lunch Project.